phone. Yeah, there we are.
Oh, oh, fancy. I don't know things like that, you know? Wow. So some of your people are already on. They were obviously waiting for you.
Awesome.
Dr. Mtimka, siyabulela kakhulu for ixesha lakho. Welcome to Moya Podcast. As you know, this is a platform where we like to make sure that the Black child is given the information that they need to grow themselves. We're not all clever, so the universe blesses some of us with different strengths, and we like to draw on those various strengths. I see you got a network problem, but it doesn't look that bad. We're going to draw some political strengths from you to understand some of the things that are going on. What's interesting about having you on today is that I know that me and you, our politics, there somewhere they diverge somewhere. Somewhere there by Ramaphosa, I just go, hey, I'm just gonna go this way, and then you're
Sure,
like, I'm going this way, you know.
sure,
So we always
sure.
appreciate different points of views because that's how we learn from each other, and perhaps we might be ignorant about something, and so we've been watching your timeline for the past week or so, and you've been burning about a lot of issues. I don't even know where you want to start because we're completely going to let you get off what is on your chest so that more of us can learn. So, good
Yeah,
morning. Yes.
so yeah, no, good morning to you and your viewers. Thank you for having me here, Mamiya, and congratulations on building this platform. I see it's gaining significant momentum. On that point about differences in terms of political choices, approaches, and attitudes. So you do know that in your family, you would have a uncle, a sibling, or even one of the parents actually that you do not agree with. So Amaxhosa had this thing that if you are married, one of the skills that you develop is to how to handle contentions among people you love, especially if you are a man, because this side, it's your mother who has been with you all the time. And then this side, it's your, wife whom you love and does something that your mother cannot and should not do for you. And so the art of saying we want people to contribute on social issues who have learned this art of how to manage these contentions is something that actually, for me, speaks of the brilliance of Amaxhosa. Yes, so that didn't mean other people didn't have their different roles. Yeah, I mean, if in my village, if there's somebody who dies, we all fit into our roles that are defined by the village. So, and those roles are important. But the reason I'm citing this one is that once you master the art of how to handle conflicts among people you love, they somehow prepare you for handling conflicts with strangers too. Because people you love that are fighting, it never escapes you that these are family, you know, and their humanity is foremost for you. And so this is what I wish in South Africa we would embrace a lot more, that we are dealing with people that, yes, indeed, in many ways they are foes and friends, but their humanity is crucial. I believe that what life was supposed to be, human life on earth was supposed to be, it was supposed to be this process of gaining cumulative insights from people so that we arrive at something which is greater per age group than what we inherited from the previous generation. So I thought I'd start from that point about differences, because we must embrace differences.
Yes.
We mustn't, differences help us to remain balanced. So I'm going to share something personal with you. So I used to say to God, my wife and I hit it off as love at first sight. So After we'd been married, I started seeing some traits in her, which I've now come to enjoy. But they used to irritate me a lot. So if you come and you invite us to a wedding in December, maybe I just prophesied there. If you invite us to a wedding in December and our current financial circumstances say we will not be able to, I, as a person who's entrepreneurial, who's always opportunity seeking, I would say, I would say, um, actually, we're gonna come. Ngazi, on the other hand, is wired in such a way that on the basis of what's happening now, she's gonna say, I know we're Assis, you know? And so I would say, God, if I had known this character trait about this woman, I would not have married her. And so we went into a contact center venture. And in this contact center venture, Ngazi kept saying, man, this thing is not going to work. There's something about it that's not going to work. And this was early in our marriage. So I was like, woman, you don't have faith, you know? And then the call center venture lasted for about 3 months and it didn't succeed. And God said to me, what were you saying again about this woman? I was like, you know what? And so God explains to me and says, the reason why I brought you together, it's because she's got this trait that counterbalances your natural instincts. And the bit about you loving her, that's not even a question. But you, whom I know, and I know how you roll, I needed to balance you with somebody who's a lot more risk averse, who's a lot more calculated, so that I could save you. But what is wisdom for you is the ability to learn and to handle this character trait. Because when you learn to do it, it's going to bring you to the middle ground. And in that middle ground, you are both greater than your individual inclinations. So Afriforum are fighting tooth and nail, and also MK Party, EFF are fighting tooth and nail. Somewhere in the middle of what they are talking about, South Africa is greater. That's my view.
Spot on.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know
So
what to make of it.
so let's go into Afriforum. I mean, Afriforum's been quite busy. What are your thoughts on that, and how does it impact us? Where is this middle ground that we need to find so that
Sure,
minority voices are also acknowledged and heard?
sure. So in South Africa, we must be mindful that we are in a very unique position as a country. If you look at histories of colonies or former colonies, especially former colonies that were settled, the word settler colonial sometimes comes as a swear word, but it's a true reflection of history. So, in countries where there was colonialism by settlement, a lot of the population of settlers or descendants thereof left or fled once the country transitioned into African rule or ruled by indigenous people. In South Africa, this was neither possible nor an agitation of the majority voices that were struggling for independence. Okay, so we have our wars from the 1600s, if you were on the westerly part of the country, or from the 1700s, if you were on the easterly and central parts. We have our wars that actually deliver at the end of the process a colonized country. whose spatial settlement in terms of who lives where is a reflection of colonial relations. I know, for example, you've had Dr. Jonge Glass explaining how Amaxhosa were not defeated in war, but Nongqawuse had a very distinct consequence in terms of resultant famine from that, and how that but what is clear is that the wars themselves did influence, they did clear space in terms of what people have called ethnic cleansing. So if you drive from Gqeberha, in Ngqusha, where I come from, you can see clearly that vast amounts of people are not living along the N2. If you drive on the N10 towards Bloemfontein, the same is true. Okay, and so spatial settlement reflects the consequences of the wars of dispossession that were fought, as well as the forced removals, especially in urban centers, that followed. Now, I've said all of that to say, when the struggle for liberation was being waged, it's being waged by a different generation to the people that carried spears and other weaponry. It's being waged by people that Tembeka Ngcukaitobi writes as people who fought with the pen, the lawyers, and in fact, if you look at the works of Otatu Soga no Enoch Sontonga, one of the songs they write, I think Enoch Sontonga, eti Nkosi Sikelele Africa, akati Nkosi Sikelele Maxhosa, which already shows you that imagination among this African intelligentsia had transitioned away from imagining nationhood as limited to the ethnic group, but something much more broader than the ethnic group. And then also, and Abatata, right in the late 1800s, right? So there's no way that their writing is an outcome of the constitutional negotiations of the 90s. But already from that time, they are imagining nationhood that is inclusive in terms of how they were envisioning South Africa. Then secondly, you have another song ethi abantsundu nabamhlophe mababulele kunye mabavakalise bonke baculele inkosi. Okay, again, it tells you, as an intelligentsia was emerging among abantu abamnyama, they were envisioning a country in which there's shared nationhood. Well, I don't even need to talk about poetry, Katatum Kai, and others. So I'm establishing a principle here that says South Africa's struggle for liberation after the wars of dispossession was a struggle that was about inclusive citizenship in terms of how we sought to address the national question. And if that is the case, it's then expressed in also in more clear terms in the 1940s by the in Africans' claims, where, according to Ngcukaitobi, this becomes the first Bill of Rights, as it were, in South Africa, written by Africans attempting to wage a struggle for liberation. They are writing a Bill of Rights, imagining a constitutional democracy, a democracy in which government doesn't have arbitrary powers, but is limited by particular rights that people would have. This is 1940s. Then, by the time we get to 1955, in writing a Freedom Charter that talks about South Africa belongs to all who live in it, people who are critics of that document like saying it's the influence of the Communist Party to an ANC that was otherwise strongly Africanist in terms of its envisioning of who would live in South Africa, who would be a legitimate citizen. But what about the evidence of all the works that had been coming that were confirming that, in fact, these people desire to live in a country that is inclusive? So why is this important, Nseki, in answering your question about Afriforum today? it's important because, you see, I think that we are a template rather than a country that should be scorned and denigrated in the same way that Elon Musk and Donald Trump are doing. South Africa builds and commits, by the way, uh, even if it was an elite settlement in the 90s, commits to saying we want to build a country in which everybody is welcome, a country in which, according to the Freedom Charter, it belongs to all who live in it. But we accept that there's a history of injustice that needs to be corrected. But how we want to correct this injustice is not doing it in ways that sow seeds of division, in such a way that another generation would come after we are gone and say, we want to right the wrongs of the recent past. So we were breaking a cycle, and I do in my other life, I talk about how to break cycles of violence and curses, as it were, in my other spiritual life. So how you do that is by forgiveness, by restorative approaches to justice, but not failure to enforce accountability. So there must be accountability. There must be recognition that some of our ancestors contributed to ethnic cleansing in order to create a world that was more livable for themselves. Others were victims of that, yet others were collaborators. So we don't. History is a mess. It's complex. It's not neat. You don't find we find what we try and do. Yeah, there's radical this side, and then there's the sellouts. The history doesn't work like that. So we as a country then, that is setting a template and an example of what happens in a former settler colony when, in fact, the majority of the population gain power, but decide that living with the peoples or descendants of peoples who had oppressed is something that is right to do, as the struggle had been, had been about. Uh, it's a country that deserves respect. We are doing better, and I dare say this, and I know many of my friends who who are Christian and have a particular view on Israel, which is historical, may be upset about this. But South Africa is doing something way better than what's happening in Israel Palestine. We are showing, in fact, what I think is more Jesus style, the idea of blessed are the peacemakers, where we make peace and we attempt to construct nationhood, not driven by ethnic politics. And then and also just to see to also address, the people who may be frowning at this point. Jesus talks to the Pharisees, and he says there were many widows in Israel at the time of Prophet Elijah, but he was not sent to any of them except the woman of the widow of Zarephath. And there were many lepers in Israel at the time that Naaman the Syrian was healed, but it was Naaman who was healed, was the Syrian. And then it is Jesus who actually evokes, teaches about neighborliness, using a despised Samaritan as a good neighbor, compared to a religious elite, Jewish guys that had seen and passed by the brutalized Jewish person, by the way. So the person who's a Jew, who's the traveler, who is brutalized by bandits, is helped by a despised Samaritan. And then lastly, when Jesus meets the Samaritan woman by the well, He knows before the conversation starts that, oh, this woman is bad news as far as uh, her relationship life is concerned. But so that woman is not only a despised Samaritan, but among the Samaritans is a despised person because everybody feels that they've taken other people's husbands. But guess who the person who says, "For I am gentle and my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Guess how he approaches that woman? He says, when the woman raises the issue of ethnic politics and says, well, you're asking me for water, but you're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan. He simply says, if you knew the gift of God and who it is who is asking you for water, you would have asked of him and he would have given you living water. Okay. Now, to say that, yes, I know about the divisions from an ethnic politics point of view. And in fact, later in the conversation, Jesus plays that ethnic card and says, well, you Samaritans worship whom you don't know. We, as the Jews, we worship whom we know, for salvation comes from the Jews. And then the conversation goes on, but he then says, to neutralize, to go back to the point he's making about ethnic identity, he goes and says, even though the Jews know whom they worship, but God is looking for those who will worship Him in spirit and in truth. So among the Samaritans don't have the real deal because they don't have the text. The Jews have the text, but still don't have the real deal because they don't worship in spirit and in truth. And then he says he seeks those, and when people see the community that goes to heaven in the afterlife. No, I'm going deeper in a different direction now. But when prophets or everybody sees people, they see a multi-ethnic community, which shows that Jesus is what he came to build is not a Jewish nationalist arrangement. And I started talking about that though when I was saying what South Africa is doing is more closer to God's kingdom, the idea of living in peace with different groups of people than what's happening in Jerusalem.
So then, how do we address the discord? Because Afriforum is creating a lot of tension amongst
Oh, sure.
people. Yeah. So then, how do we navigate that
Okay.
space?
Yeah. So it was important for me to start with that broad philosophical and almost theological exposition. Now, with Afriforum represents a group that appreciates living in a wonderful country where privilege was entrenched, white privilege was entrenched over time. And they don't want any fiddling with that privilege. And by the way, if you look at whether it's BEE, employment equity, uh, and other redress legislation, they're not necessarily attacking white privilege. They are saying, let's broaden privilege. And they've got rules about how that privilege should be broadened, which, Nsiki, are better than the ethnic cleansing that was done in order to create white privilege. Okay. But Afriforum and company uh, have got a propagandist history that they have drilled on themselves and their children, which is strongly denialist of
Yeah.
the history of settlement of South Africa. That's the first thing that they do. Now, when they do that, they want to do two things. One, to appease any sense of guilt among white people. Well, that's commendable. You don't want anybody to go around with guilt, but you want people to go around with acknowledgement that
Yeah.
we have a deeply painful history in which my ancestors contributed significantly to making. But I also say, without, for example, Jan Smuts, South Africa would not be this highly industrialized, okay, maybe we because remember now there were the Mapungubwes and other civilizations
Exactly.
that preceded. But in modern history, in contemporary history, it was the visionary leadership, although for a narrow purpose and a narrow grouping of Jan Smuts, that, by the way, did something which today Afriforum would go to court for. Jan Smuts took profits from the mining sector and built infrastructure in South Africa, you know? And so they want to benefit from privilege, but they want nothing that has to do with responsibility for redress. Now, obviously, we are talking in grand narrative terms. I have met a lot of people, white people, Afrikaner people, who have done amazing with BEE legislation. One guy, for example, I won't say where for his protection, he's in the citrus space, and he saw some of his top black managers, and he said, you know what, guys, if we are going to succeed here, we have to make sure that this sector is inclusive. So he bought farms leveraging his own balance sheet and put his best managers to run these farms. And his terms were that you must buy me out within a particular time period. I think it was 10 years. When I was interviewing him for my book, he says to me, bro, 70% have already bought me out. Okay. And he says, when people are burning farms here and there's toy toy, you will hardly see people touch my farm. And he says, the reason why I know people will not touch my farm, I don't treat workers. Uh, I don't ill treat workers. Workers are respected here. Workers have got delegated powers. My managers are happy. And we are doing these deals that help us to succeed. I've met other people who have embraced, the transformation imperatives in South Africa and are using them to their advantage. Now, there's a case to be made about segmented um, application of laws. And indeed, South African law actually is segmented because remember that BE's legislation is not static. In the 1990s, we were worried about sudden billionaires among politicians that came. BE in the mid 2000s was no longer that. And BE today is no longer that. You will see, for example, that today ownership only accounts weighs about 25%. Okay. The rest is community investment, which is a broad-based measure, worker ownership schemes, supplier development, black supplier development, enterprise development, and then also exemption for for white businesses that are at a particular threshold, below a certain threshold. Okay, they call it qualifying small enterprises. To create this impression that there's one big BEE act that's affecting all white people the same. If you are a white person and you don't own a business, you are not affected by BE the same way that a big commercial farmer is. But Afriforum takes all these things and clouds them and create this impression of a white people under siege. I am so encouraged today and yesterday that we're seeing a lot of South Africans tweeting and fighting against that narrative that Afriforum has built to say, I'm white, I'm in South Africa, and I don't fear that my property is going to be taken. The Act doesn't envisage that. So to go back to my point, the fighting is good, by the way. We do need people who fight for constituencies. What is wrong is manipulation, is misrepresentation of facts, among other things. And by the way, organized white interests, and that's not saying white people, organized white interests in South Africa have always felt, those that are on the right, let me say, have always felt that they needed to manipulate and create impressions about and create fictitious stories about the coming of black people in their numbers and how they are going to obliterate you or they threaten you in your jobs and all of these things in order for them to become viable political entities throughout
You,
history. The 1920s, the Swart Khafar language is what galvanized support for the political projects that would end up giving birth to apartheid, you know. And today, the Afriforum still interprets that they need to manufacture a white genocide narrative in order for them to be to continue to be relevant. It's almost like the same tactic that is used by insurance companies, some of whom have been alleged to be involved even in the farm matters. Yeah.
Yeah, I see a very interesting comment here, but I don't think it's a matter of privilege. They are used to, they just hate blacks. This was evident on the Bella Bill and NHI Act. It's not that they don't agree with the policies, they don't agree to blacks. So if Afriforum is so openly racist, should we not be taking some form of legal action?
The majority of South Africans, black and white, have got moderate views that buy into a mutual coexistence. That I can say. Where do we see the evidence of it? The support base, 60% of it is in the ANC and the DA. In my view, the ANC and the DA are center left to center right parties. Okay? Now, they are centrist parties. Then
Okay.
you have the parties on some of them style themselves as far left. Others are far left. Please don't ask me to say which ones.
I think we know.
And then you've got political projects that are on the far right, and there are non-profits that are far right. They are the problem. They are the ones who mobilize around identity politics. Because remember now, our system is proportional representation, precisely because you cannot take identity completely out of political representation. It's impossible. Okay, but it's meant so the ones that mobilize on grievance exploitation, that's what I'm looking for. Grievance exploitation, in my view, are on the extremes. You know what I mean? We know there are grievances. The grievances are there. By the way, it's proven that in the history of civil wars, it's not the existence of grievances themselves that push nations to go into war. It is usually the exploitation of those grievances by political elite that push nations to go into war. So, I mean, I don't know. I've never. Okay, well, there's the in my life generally, I don't experience overt racism. I don't think any of my kids have. We are generally, people want to live. Maybe some of it has to do with the fact that I went to senior secondary schools as opposed to the Model C schools. But generally, though, South Africans are people who just want to make money, earn a living, and thrive. And by the way, I think that Rassi Erasmus. Now many people will be, saying I'm now again down on the false rainbowism trajectory, which I am happy to happily admit. I think in rugby we are doing something right in the entire value chain of rugby. There needed to be the earlier battles that were fought to force the community to think about the poor representation of black people. And by the way, it was a lie to say that black people were not playing rugby. Rugby has been played by black people since the 1800s. We've got the books of Dr. Muntu Siwisa, among others, to prove that. We've had people playing for the Black Springboks throughout. So the idea that they weren't players was not true. But I can appreciate now when I look at the rugby value chain system from the schools, right? My son, who's 16 now, knows who's the best fly half in his age group. Okay, so maybe what the elite of rugby meant at the time was that we don't see these black boys in our fishing pond, which is Model C schools back in the days. Okay, and the few that were there were treated with racist attitudes. But I don't know, Ntsik, if you're watching this, but I'm looking at South African rugby today, and I'm like, you know, at least there's intentionality here. The schools are intentional about, they would go to Zwide and say, wow, this boy is good. Let's take him from Zwide. Let him come to our school, Gray, St. Andrews, and all these schools. And what they're doing in that is to create in the pipeline of rugby visible players that can be selected, such that very soon we are no longer as concerned about representativity, because we have seen that great talented players are being selected. Okay, obviously, what is left out now are the senior secondary schools, because they're not part of this in the same extent as other schools. They're not part of this pool of players that are playing and are visible, and SA schools are filming. Okay, but we are far in rugby, to the extent that I'm saying the momentum that's been gained is great. Now, if we could do it in rugby, and I think Rassi Erasmus is a really great guy, passionate, a strong national hero, if you like, somebody who, I mean, he's just amazing, this guy. He's been able to tap into this, Sia Kolisi, and the rest of the rugby playing community. And I'm saying we must learn something from rugby, that intentionality is what we are calling for. You know, what we're lacking in business, but again, when I say lacking, remember, we are not producing as much aggregated national data as we should. Okay, about our problem in South Africa, we're too focused on transformation as it happens in the JSE. We should, because it's a listed entity, but there's a lot of collaborations among black and white in businesses that are not registered and are not going to show in the JSE. And by the way, there are many of those than there are companies in the JSE. But we're not seeing it in the same way that we're seeing in rugby. And so we don't know how to feel about how much momentum we're gaining in transformation, because we are not gathering the data. I was involved in trust administration in the renewable energy sector, and I got to see how much the Department of Minerals and Energy at the time used to actually shambok the renewable energy sector to spend in communities that are hosting minerals. You and I know we were starting in the early 2000s and talking about the resource curse in Africa. Now you have a government that has got a history of over 100 years or so mining, that actually has got social labor plans. They've got they force as part of policy and licensing companies to invest in communities, and there is investment taking place. We can debate about how effective those are, but we can't debate from thin air. We must do the work of analyzing and taking deep dives into these investments that are being made. Are they achieving some results? So we've seen these. We are seeing collaborations. We're seeing investments in communities where renewable energy projects are, and mining is no longer ignoring communities. Now communities are fighting about how substantive and how meaningful the engagement is, compared to when we started, when they're fighting about these people don't see us. You know what I mean? So we've had Petroleum Resources Development Acts that have been updated in order to force mining companies to engage with their communities. They are engaging communities. They are investing. But are these things are these things perfect? Absolutely not. They will not be. It's humans that are involved.
You know, I'm so glad Victor's bringing this comment up, because I wanted to say to you that I hear you about rugby, right? But on the other side as well, I've heard of sometimes the rugby trials are in places that are inaccessible to poor black rugby players, you know, and also the issue around why is it that rugby sponsorship is so much larger than soccer sponsorship, and why is it when it's rugby then it's stronger together, but then when it's time to support a black sport, the white people don't show up. So nalapho Victor Shongwe uthi rugby is promoted as a status symbol. Integration occurred in soccer at the height of apartheid simply because blacks were ready to accommodate white players. So
Yeah,
your comments on that?
we've always had our heroes, the Neil Tovies, the Mark Fishes, the Gary Baileys, and all these Dean Furmans and the national heroes, right? So I don't mention soccer because soccer has always been, has always been an integrated sport. But very interesting point about investment. Okay, now we remember there's method to these things. When and Sam Victor Blanche tells this story, one of the best writers in my view about South African political economy. Remember that capital is leveraged and you get it from somewhere. So Sam Victor Blanche makes the point that when the English were in power in the 1800s until 1948, they leveraged state power to build a professional class of the English. And that process allowed them to grow so much in terms of asset ownership, income earning, that by the time 1948 started and there was a shift towards Afrikanerdom, the English could establish, could continue and play in the JSE and privately, because they had already leveraged state power in the 1800s and throughout the 1900s. And then Sambi makes the point that the Afrikaner also use and leverage state power in order to build a capital base for Afrikaners. They start Bo, Sanlam, and all these networks of entities. And I think two colleagues I've spoken with recently, Jacob Marocha and Nomalanga Mkhize, explaining in precise ways how did it happen how did it happen that the Afrikaner built a capital base? Come 94, the Afrikaner had, and by the way, remember, we're talking about the elite, and then the average person is growing in smaller ways than the elite were growing. Now, I've said that to say, Zik, so people invest in what interests them. It is private capital that is investing in these schools, and it's their schools. Now, I personally have not yet reached that stage where my philanthropy goes beyond my family, because remember, family is big. Okay, well, in many ways it does. Okay, in many ways it does, but not in the same scale as I would love. So the creation of, but Patrice Motsepe does. Okay. I mean, it's got a foundation that spans about, in a given period, sometimes of 50 million, 100 million in charitable enterprises. So these things do not come except by a methodical acquisition of wealth, and then they use the transitioning from success to significance. We need to show a little bit more sacrifice. So you've got schools that were built by Afriforum. So yeah, now here's another thing. So we hate Afriforum. Okay, hate is a strong word, but irritating. They irritate sometimes, right? But I agree with Gary Krill that they have a lot of good that they do, even though they irritate, especially this week. Okay, so they build a school, build universities, build this, leveraging the nexus between private and public sector capital. And it's the time for us to do that. And I'm not saying that, I'm not advancing a nationalistic or ethnic agenda. I'm saying together with white owned businesses and black owned businesses and government, we need to invest in the schools. Now, the schools that you're talking about, a lot of them are public schools, by the way. These big schools that are, a pool for rugby talent. A lot of them are public schools which are funded by parents and are funded by endowments from old boys and girls. Okay, we should also go down that trajectory. We should also, I mean, look at sport, sport administered by the departments leave a lot to be desired. They leave a lot. I mean, fortunately, I've got a teenage son and a 10-year-old, and I've seen how humiliating when when they go and represent the Eastern Cape. Look, it's something we're grateful, right? Trevor, no one talks about this thing of white people must teach black people how to complain, and then black people must teach white people when to complain. I agree with him on that. So I'm appreciative that my son has represented the province of the Eastern Cape several times. But when the administration is taking place of provincial teams participating, we need to up the standard. Where you find that we do things late, we complain about budgets. While complaining about budget, we want to book flights 2 days before the flight is. You are gonna pay expensive flights. Our kids they would arrive there. All the other kids from other provinces are coming there with nice uniform. Ours are coming here, and their uniform is only gonna arrive the next day. Come on, there's a lot of things that are within our control that we are not doing with the spirit of excellence and Ubuntu, by the way. Ubuntu is respecting our own, respecting people, and we're not treating each other with respect. And you
So
can't
I
have
want to go.
development.
I'd like to go back to this point of when we're talking about investment and stuff, and you're saying that Afrikaners invest in themselves, but it could be argued that the white population has got their privilege and the capital because of exploiting the resources and the people of this land. So rightfully, should they not be enforced legally also again to give back? Somebody was asking there, Guti, but when they build these resources, Nangu Natuti, when these resources are for everyone or just for Afrikaners? So we
Mostly,
tend to find that they just do it for themselves, but however, they've exploited black minerals, black human resources, and our history basically.
sure, sure. So they've transitioned, a lot of them, the schools, and they're open now in the democratic period. Okay, now they've started with a school that teaches Afrikaans. I don't know whether they envisage an Afrikaner only arrangement there. I don't know. But the point I want to make is that these schools have been transformed because they were public schools. And then the Bella Act, in my view, is creating power in the state so that where language policy is used arbitrarily to exclude, okay, remember now, we must have more teaching in the vernac than less. So I don't propagate the idea that African schools should be closed. We should open more schools that is Zulu, English, and everything else. That's the principle of language policy. Because Afrikaans in South Africa is spoken by more people who are not white than white. And even if it was spoken by white people only, I would still be of the view you don't want to close African schools. You want to build and have more schools, that where people can participate. But what I want to say is that the Bella Act, in my view, creates a mechanism, and it is nothing like what the response to the act has been. Because remember now, it is structured in terms of how to intervene in a school. It doesn't happen arbitrarily. In fact, when I was reading it, I realized this is the same when you intervene in a municipality or a province. The process is so structured that there's participation even at the level of the SGB to say yay or nay, and where arbitrary decision is taken, it can be negated. So I'm saying, one, the schools have been transformed. Two, another mechanism of transformation to prevent arbitrary exclusion has now been created. But also, you're quite right, they leveraged public resources in order to build a capital base. Now, Tshidi, we've done Ntsiki, sorry, we've done the same. We created in the democratic period, uh, in fact, we transformed public institutions, created, some of them created by the Afrikaners before then, the Smuts government, which was, a more united government. Now, we got those institutions in the immediate post-94 period, put some of the best executives, black executives, and progressive white and progressive Indian, and colored. So when I'm making use of black in the holistic sense, we had great people running municipalities. We had great people running um, uh, 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 um, uh, state-owned enterprises. And then we had a period in which we just kicked those people out and destroyed those institutions. And as a result of that, we repurposed what was meant to be institutions that are helping us to thrive. And for narrow groups, and we can always explain, we can always argue about why this group needed to do that, okay? Because I think the elitist nature of how South Africa managed the post-apartheid integration of the black elites had the seeds for what would eventually happen in terms of targeting of these institutions by a different group of political players to also want to extract. Because my view is that the white business did a divide and conquer of taking some and leaving some, and then those who were left decided, okay, we're gonna grab the state and we're going to do our own redistribution. Okay, so okay, but regardless of what the point was, the point is the ransacking of the state, in my view, eroded what we could do with those institutions in order to do the same thing that Saint-Peter Blanche has recorded, okay, in terms of what the English and the Afrikaner did in order to succeed.
Are you seeing the comment on screen and can you respond to it?
Afrikaans was imposed forcefully and inhumanely on indigenous people. Let us not distort the facts. I don't know what that's meant to achieve in that comment.
Well, it's
Afrikaans is a language. We okay. Let's make it. Let's continue the point. Uh, Joburg, mining, and the entire economy of South Africa today was precisely built like that. So what must we do? That's why I was saying it's a painful past. We're a country that is building from it, and we do away with what can be done away with. We build with what can be built. I don't think any language should be done away with. We must develop scientific capacity in all languages so that we can teach them. In fact, there is inherent scientific capacity in all languages. I'm writing a piece, I've been writing this since 2019 when I find time. I'm writing a piece on political institution building from selected isiXhosa proverbs. And it's amazing how some of these proverbs are instructive about deep political philosophical issues. Okay, such as, for example, akho qili linozikotha umhlana, ne? When you say akho qili linozikotha umhlana, you're making reference to how iqili, I don't know what it is in English, cannot scratch its own back. Okay. Now, amaXhosa evoked that as a philosophical concept to say, as a human, you cannot be completely self-sufficient. In fact, completely is an edit. You cannot be self-sufficient. You cannot be self-sufficient holistically. Okay, which then is an instructive thing about how do we conduct ourselves in society, in the polity and in the economy. You know what I mean? So this is me saying there's value in developing languages. I mean, we look. I understand the person who's making that point and how it evokes resentment. I was taught Afrikaans until 12th grade, and I think because of that inherent resentment of the language when I was younger, I couldn't I couldn't speak it. Now I regret that decision because I'm not more empowered for not being able to speak Afrikaans. You know, I go to a church, for example, where a lot of my fellow congregants speak Afrikaans and they are not white. I go to business meetings where I feel if I could throw in one or two sentences in Afrikaans, these would build bridges. I go to Joburg and I bua with my broken Sesotho. This is the laws of how networks and business and relationships are deepened.
Dr. Ongama, I'm so glad that we are at this language issue because that's where exactly where our politics are and our culture, even when we speak to the proverbs. So it brings attention to the importance of language. And
Yeah.
why is it then that in these Bella bills and stuff, the priority is English and Afrikaans and not indigenous languages? And why are we okay with this? And do you not think perhaps you're speaking from a point of privilege because you've got access to these schools and the economic resources, and therefore your world um, is a little bit different from somebody who, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I went to Mfundo in the senior secondary school, by the way. So I didn't. My siblings did. I think by the time they were grown up, our parents had a lot more money. So let me say this: the language policy in the country is a lot more progressive. The implementation is something else. If you look at the higher education sector, I mean, in my own university, we're updating our language policy even after an earlier language policy had given us the right to say, for example, in class I can explain things in isiXhosa, I can explain things in English, and I can and if I could speak Afrikaans, then I could. What happens is that if there's a student that doesn't understand, I am able to say to pick a student that understands Afrikaans and ask them to explain something in Afrikaans. So language policies have become a lot more progressive over time. I mean, the expropriation bill, I don't know. So it wasn't the draft that I saw was written in English and Sesotho, or it must have been Setswana. Please pardon my failure to distinguish between the two. So it was in either Sesotho or Setswana. So showing that we are getting somewhere. The progress, what we should all admit, because the evidence is in front of us, the progress is not as much as we would like it to be. The pace is not, and that's a function of leadership, that's a function of resources, that's a function of will and passion.
Hey, this language thing is so interesting. Andrea saying the oppressors attempted to erase the native languages as a tool to divide and conquer the indigenous people. I also want to get to Anthony's comment, which says when we use European ways of expression of thinking, we think as Europeans. It's a cultural misorientation.
Imagine when we integrate. Imagine when we use isiXhosa African and European ways. My view is we become a lot more powerful than when we are, separatist in our approaches. Um, I think a lot of how I speak English is actually influenced by my isiXhosa, in terms of phrasing and all of those, diplomacy, among other things. I mean, isiXhosa, as you know, usithi ukrwada. If you speak things just the way they should be spoken. We have words. The whole language is built around diplomacy. If you've lent me money, you generally you can't come to me and say, Ongama, give me my money. You are more likely gonna say, Ongama, I've come for those clothes. And I'm translating in this course, I think, Dizele lampahla. And it's a diplomatic thing. So, but my view is competencies in these languages, in my native language and in English, is way better. And that's why even in my input when we were discussing a language policy that we're busy updating, I was saying we must never undermine our power when in multilingualism. So even as we seek to deepen speaking native languages and teaching our native languages, we mustn't wish to be less competent in English. We must hold these competences because they make us very powerful, in my view.
Sure. This hour went by so quickly. I'm just quickly checking some last comments, Nyana. Afrikaans comes from the slaves in the Cape. The original Afrikaners were brown people, but it got hijacked by white people. Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Appreciated fact, actually.
Yeah. Hey, so there's a lot to unpack. Um, I did only ask for an hour, but if there's anything else you want to get off your chest, you are most welcome to. We've had such very
Yeah.
insightful discussion. I'm so glad you pointed out that isiXhosa is such a humble language because you could be viewed as a good black, a well-behaved black,
Look,
but no.
so here's the thing about, okay, maybe it has to do with the spiritual journey that I've walked. There's a place in life and in your sense of personhood where your own internal questions are so settled that how you come across at certain times doesn't really become an issue. So let me go to a very interesting conversation between Satan and Jesus, if you permit me. So Satan comes and says to Jesus, if you are the Son of God, turn these stones into bread. Now, I always say it's interesting how meek Jesus was, because he simply says, "You shall not live by bread alone." But if it was Ongama, I would say, "What do you mean if?" You know what I mean? My first issue would not be I must turn stone into bread. My first issue would be, what do you mean if? Now, why am I citing this, Nsiki? It's because Jesus had a sense of security about who he was, so complete, so secure, that even a swipe at his personhood, he missed, he just didn't have to respond to it. He simply responds to what the issue was. Now, when I started public intellectual engagement, I used to block a lot of people who are saying nasty things, right? And I'm saying this because I think we are wrapping up, so I wanna at least share some of the things that the mental and psychological processes that helped me a lot in dealing with being South African and the contradictions of identity. So when I was blocking a lot of people, more so people who say you have PhD but you think like that, or you have PhD, you don't sound, you bought your PhD. I that was an automatic block. One time, God's Spirit says to me, Ongama, you realize that how you respond to these things is reflective of unsettled things in your heart about who you are, more than it is about these people. So do this for me. Just unblock. People, I mean, people are people. They're gonna just unblock people and learn to handle these things. Because remember now, on another day, I'll tell maybe on over coffee, I'll tell you a story about how I became a very defensive person. I think I'm better now than when I first started. But God said to me, you see, the reason why you are so sensitive to these things, it's because you are not secure about who you are. So just allow people to speak. Now, I think we can learn a lot in South Africa about this. And I started it, drawing it from, if you are the Son of God, do this. If you do this, yeah. So Jesus had learned the art of how to be secure in who you are, and how to be secure in who you are. And I found that security for myself. So now I engage with vulnerability, I engage with a great courage. And my view is, whatever people say, or some of the things are constructive, some of the things are just reflective of who people are.
Indeed. Hey, I
Oh,
did say
sorry,
this.
sorry. The one thing I still want to say something about how we can build South Africa. But
Okay, no
after
problem.
after after your comment,
No, I thought we were wrapping up. Go ahead,
yeah.
please.
So here's my part in short. The I am not just an intellectual. I've worked in an industrial development project when I started, and I saw how young, mostly engineers in their 40s, were building something of excellence. So excellent as an infrastructure delivery initiative that it became commercialized and offered to the rest of government and in different parts of the continent. An organization, the Kucha Development Corporation, where I started working. Then I moved from there to the municipality, Nelson Mandela Bay, and I saw young, black and white executives, passionate guys that were doing great work. Those guys left in that period that I was saying. People started being undermined for being professionals, being undermined by people who were less educated and less of leaders, maybe. Okay, and then also now I've said, and then I spent about 10 years helping people who want to build, entrepreneurs who want to build businesses, writing business plans for them. A lot of people were being ripped off in terms of registering companies. I was coming in with very low, I think with low prices, helping people to register a business, pay annual returns, write a business plan, and all of those things. And having done all of that, Ntsiki, I'm of the view that we have a lot of untapped potential in South Africa. We're very arrogant capital allocation processes. Okay. And I can say that without any fear of contradiction. Our people who make decisions about investments are arrogant in this sense that people will be there with great products that are likely going to succeed in the market. And then let's say, and I've looked at these, some of them are furnitures, some of them are wonderful designs of pillows, some of them are other products for interior decor, some of them are shoes. In Gqeberha, I've seen wonderful shoes, okay, done. I asked this one guy one time, how much is this shoe? He told me 3 grand. And I said, bruh, this shoe is 3 grand. I can attest to that. The design and everything. All we need. So, for example, if we assume that white people and the black elite have got capital, all that is needed is to tear down the bridges of separation that make us not to see what exists and treat it as though it doesn't exist. So, for example, that guy that makes wonderful designer shoes, I could leverage my credit, I could leverage assets that I have into say, let's expand. You expand that business, you're expanding with that guy's value chain, you are expanding with whoever supplies him upstream, and you're creating new products. What we've seen though is that some of my clients, business plan clients, struggled to have access to shelf life in the retail stores. Some of them actually did. I remember I had a guy who was manufacturing soaps and pine gels. This guy used to sell at a spa at Daku, and his products were flying. But other people come up with wonderful products and struggle for shelf life. I did Hluma magazine, and I battled to find shelf life. I wrote my book, Family Feuds, God as a Plan Amidst All the Chaos. When I was approaching retailers, book retailers, I'd be told, go to one of these three big five distributors in the country. You speak to the guys and you find, okay, this one has got religious dogma that makes them not to accept this new thinking. I've met people who've written wonderful books who are saying I can't find publishers because I'm saying what I'm saying is controversial. So we've got books, we've got films, we've got songs. I mean, I studied Echini, you know. Echini, there was a lovely hip hop scene. There was, I mean, when you listen to these guys, you're like, wow, this thing could be on mainstream media platforms. And it's how people are contending with their realities in townships, in rural, and it's beautiful. But you see, we one of the things we have to overcome is self-doubt. One of the things we have to overcome is the belief that for something to be good, it has to come from outside the country, or so we're not nurturing talent. And the result of not nurturing talent, we're paying a heavy price for it. We've got also white guys. So part of some of what we need to rethink are some of the threshold for policies. And listen to me now carefully. I'm not saying in the same way that Afriforum and other lobby groups are saying. But some of the thresholds we can revise for in ways that are saying, okay, what is the greater total benefit to society? And we support people. So we can't have a one size fits all that says you get funding, you get funding if you are 51% black owned, right? There are times when that is crucial. There are times where if a 51% white owned still makes sense. There are times when 56% white owned still makes sense. But now these guys, some of these guys who have capital, don't realize that even 49% ownership can be structured in ways that help you to harness potential and succeed. Last example, I make this example all the time, and I must now send invoice to BKB. So BKB is a company in the wool sector. I don't say they're perfect, but they've mastered the art of integrating umama kaZibhexengeshe noZibhexengeshe in the rural areas in the global wool value chain. People are sharing their sheep. It's summer, and BKB has had a process of how to get that wool and collect it and sell it and pay those people. My dad, who was not focused on sheep farming, he had a retail store, but he would phone one time and say, "Hey, Ngama, we've just shared, and I got a 5 grand from my small head." So we stopped doing those things. We're not in Engusha, where I come from. You don't find beef in the same quantities among people the same way that you're going to find in Ngushu. But we're not having those people participate in the beef value chain. Whereas when I was growing up, because of Khulmende Gasebe, that thing was a thing. When I had to pay my minimum initial payment at Rhodes, we would sell auction. Today, there aren't any auction facilities back home. You know what I mean? So we need to harness, we need intentionality in harnessing what people do anyway by themselves, enhance human potential, make sure that we nurture it. And when it grows, we're going to grow. In my view, I argue we must invest that a lot more than we invest chasing FDI. Because FDI comes and says, I know, relax your labor laws, do this, that, and the other. But when we grow from our own, I mean, it takes a lot for you to exploit your own people that you know? Yeah, that's that. I wanted to wrap up with that thing that says we must be fair in allocating capital. I hear government keep creating funds, right? But when they create those funds, they're going to employ the same accountants who have not started a business, who don't know how it feels to not have monthly commitments to pay, but to have, no, I'm going to pay when I have money, chief. I don't want to sign a loan that says you're going to deduct, because there are times when you're not going to find money in my bank account. But structure a deal that says when I have money, I can pay a little bit, and we will see business starting to grow. The other thing that government does is not to fund professionals because they have this requirement that says you must leave your job. I think it's time to do away with that thing, and leverage professionals who are working but want to have elements of themselves built in a business somewhere and employing people. Yeah, anyway, thank you. Thank you. I know I've spoken a lot, and that's all I have to
Perhaps I
say.
think that will be part of our part two, how we unpack how South Africa has deindustrialized and how the white capital monopoly is actually barring the economic growth of the country. We would love to unpack all of that. I will
along
speak to
along
you.
al- along with trade unions and politicians, by the way, who sometimes act in their interests and their elite interests and not in the interest of the country.
Correct. That is the topic for part two. So I'll speak to you on the side about our part two, which we definitely would love to have with you. Thank you so much for sharing with us this morning. We really appreciated you. Moya Wright, thank you so much for joining in on the live stream. Keep your eyes on our social media to see when the next live stream is. And we will be live streaming from the Tabang Tabane memorial service later on. So thank you for all the support, and we'll see you again next time. Umoya ulight, umoya ubright. Thank you so